Welcome back to a study in the book of Genesis. We're looking at Genesis 4:18 through to 5:23. This phrase is often found in the book of Genesis, and it highlights different sections. These are the things that followed. Genesis 4:16, after the murder of Abel and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. Developments in the line of Cain. There's verse 17, the city of Enoch. 19, polygamy with Lamech. 20, livestock, Jabal. 21, music in the arts, Jubal. 22, mythology, Tubal-Cain. And 23-24, the attitude of Lamech. The line of Seth is unremarkable except for two comments. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. 5:22, then Enoch walked with God. There are two humanities described. One is rich in materialistic culture and technological progress. The other is materially unremarkable. Which had the greater impact? We understand all these names and we're familiar with them. Cain's descendants followed the ways of men. That's a interesting and recurring idea all the way through, the idea of following the ways of men rather than the ways of God. Seth's descendants followed the ways of God, and here we have the lineage through to Jesus. In chapter 11 we will deal with a problem in the text, some of our modern Bibles, regarding the ages of some of the descendants. We have Abel and Seth and Cain and Lamech. Then we have Enoch, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Canaan, and then the other side Abraham. They've got the godly line and the ungodly line. According to elders, this should be translated, he was building a city. Genesis 4:17 says, and Cain's wife became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and they named him Enoch. When Cain founded a city, he named it Enoch after his son. There's no record of his ever having completed a city mentioned here. Again, remember, we're talking about a compression of time. There's a lot of time involved between Cain going off, finding a wife, and her becoming pregnant, and her giving birth to a son, and then this involved in founding a city and naming it after his son. So there's at least 9 months, but dealing with the birth of the son. But there's lots of other years in between. And remember, we talked about that before, that the Bible often compresses history because it's got a purpose in mind, and therefore lots of time passes. We also are reminded that here's one of the big questions that people often ask. Well, where did Cain get his wife from? And obviously he must have married one of his sisters. And then the question comes back, well, surely that's incest. But we also remember that incest wasn't condemned until Moses wrote many years later under the law, when he brought forth the law. So when the first people, Adam and Eve, were created, they were created perfect. And it takes time for the effects of the sin, i.e. leaving the garden, leaving the access to the tree of life, to begin to mess up the genealogies and the cells within the human body, so they begin to break down and malfunction and get wrong, and therefore you have a situation where over time marrying someone so close would introduce all sorts of problems, and so therefore it had to be stopped. Excuse me. But initially, all children were descended from Adam and Eve, and therefore the males married the females, which would be close relatives at the time. In Genesis 4:3, there's an expression, in the process of time. This moves this episode to a point long after the events of the preceding chapter. One of the things we need to understand is that God is not telling us all that happened to everybody. This compression of time and the events are being selected by that God wants us to understand, and it'll help us for us to see the big picture. There are many nations later on that the Bible touches on, and the word touches on is really complete, because we don't know a lot, we're not given a lot of information about these other nations. Why? Because they're not important to God's bringing about the ultimate sacrifice of his son on the cross for everybody. And so nations are mentioned, perhaps one sentence, 10 sentences, not much more, and then moved on, because they're not the central issue, they're not the central story. And that's something we need to be aware of. There were evidently many people on earth by this time, covering events such as a couple of 100 years after the expulsion from Eden. A city in that day was a stronghold, a fort, built on high ground and walled. It's amazing how quickly human nature needs defending, even today, if you look at families, you see dysfunctional families where brother is against brother and brother and against sister are constantly at each other's throats. And it was by that time there was no much difference in the first century after creation, first couple of centuries after creation. It soon becomes jealousy, and all sorts of stuff begin to raise their head. So we have the city, and we have different names in the Old Testament. Often a name is significance. So we have Enoch, gracious or dedicated. Irad, from the word for city, it describes a city dweller, a citizen. Mehujel, smitten of God. Methuselah, who is a man of God. And Lamech, well, not too sure about this one, to my own. We find that many names are similar because people are often fond of repeating names of important ancestors. We think in terms of, for example, Scotland, where the same name John or the same Robert or something like that could be passed on through many, many generations, from father to son to father to son to father to son. Abraham had a brother and a grandfather named Nahor. There were 2 Judahs among the 12, 2 Simons among the 12. In the genealogy of Christ, we find such names as Amos, Nahum, Judas, Jesus, 2 Mathats, Eleazar, and a number of others may easily be identified with persons outside of Jesus' ancestry as well as inside. There are so many Marys in the Bible that sometimes it's difficult to determine what is meant. Lamech marks the culmination of the line of Cain. If Cain shows an expansion and development of the sin from Adam and Eve, then Lamech shows the expansion and development of the sin of Cain. Lamech's legacy begins with polygamy. He takes for himself 2 wives. This was contrary to the creation design. God had not created Adam, Eve, and Gertrude. There was no law against polygamy at this time, neither was it authorized or condoned. Later, the Mosaic law would warn the future kings of Israel against multiplication of wives. That was a law that was often broken. We're not told that polygamy of Lamech led to any specific problems, but we shall see in the next paragraph that his attitude towards others was not that of a godly man. There's a lesson here for parents. It is that your children may take and develop the legacy you have given them. We ought therefore to consider the legacy we are leaving and to be intentional about how we shape that legacy. Lamech 4:19 says Lamech took himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, the name of the other Zillah. For now we're given an overview of Lamech and his children and their accomplishments. Jabal, to bring or carry along. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Jubal, ram's horn. He was involved in music, from which we get our English word jubilee. Tubal-Cain, he was a metalsmith. The Eastern Masoretic understood this to mean Tubal the metalworker. Iron, on the other hand, is a more recent discovery. Iron beads have been found in Egyptian jewellery as early as 3400 BC. It is thought by many to have been used even earlier, but it's not until 1400 that the Hittites developed a closely guarded monopoly of smelting their iron ore, which they mined from the mountains of eastern Anatolia. Nanaan, beautiful. We can assume the attributes of physical beauty. Verse 20 says, Adnah gave birth to Jabal, who is the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. What is visible here is the development of a tent-dwelling population, Jabal being the leader of this. The word cattle is also different from flocks, visible earlier, perhaps indicating the increase of the number and kinds of domesticated animals. Ada is also the name of the wife of Esau, and she was a Hittite, indicating some of the names are beyond tribal connections. What is visible in these verses is the technical progress of human race accompanied by deteriorating morality. Verse 21 says his brother's name was Jubal, the first musician, the inventor of the harp and flute. This has been the characteristic of civilization through the course of Adam's race, that things usually get worse before they get better. The enthronement of sin in the cities of the world begins also to appear in these early records of human development. This was the attitude of the Chaldeans that God raised to power to punish his sinful people. Such individuals put their trust in their strength. These men are not only filled with pride, but pride is their God, Habakkuk says. Tubal-Cain, 422, to Lamech's other wife Zillah was born Tubal-Cain. He was the first to work with metal, forging instruments of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain had a sister named Naamah. Tubal-Cain was the forger of implements of bronze and iron. Bronze is an alloy of copper mixed with 10% tin, which increases strength. The greater the ratio of tin, the lower the melting point. Examples of copper implements date back as early as 6000 BC, while bronze artifacts have been dated at 3700 BC. Many of the women in Tubal-Cain's sister was certainly not the first female born on earth. Two women beside Eve, Ada and Zillah, are mentioned in verse 19, one of which was the mother of Nahum, but it would be hundreds and maybe even at this point thousands of women and being born all over the place. Why is she mentioned here when the sisters of other men are not? That is a question I can't answer. Perhaps she was famous in her time for her beauty, as were the daughters of Job. The logo of the International Order of Job's Daughters. In 22, Lamech's other wife Zillah was born Tubal-Cain. Job in 42:13-15, the logo is the International Order of Job's Daughters. The first daughter he named Jemimah, the second Kezai, and the third Keren-Hapuk. Nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father granted them an inheritance along with the brothers. This is very unusual, isn't it? Zillah's daughters are named because they got tribal allotments, since their father had no sons in Joshua. Perhaps the reason for this genealogy is that we might have a snapshot of the characteristics of the descendants of Cain. They were civilized and cultured people, and perhaps even a religious people, but they were without the Lord. They had developed their own animistic, perhaps, religions. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech, heed my speech. I have killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. He was some character. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. One day. This is one of the first recorded songs in history. It's a song of a boastful man. While Cain had committed murder, Lamech had done much more. He killed a man and had written a song to commemorate his deed. He's proud of it. We need to compare these two men. Cain murdered his own brother. God promised to protect Cain. Lamech killed a man for wounding him. Lamech promises to protect himself. Lamech's song points out his worldview. He's a humanist. He places his own well-being as supremely important. His humanism doesn't give a high view of his fellow man. He represents a very low view of man. He sees his fellow man as having no worth, of no value. Humanism is quite popular today. As a matter of fact, in many humanist funerals, you'll hear actually being said, we are not a religion, and yet they are, just as much as any other religion. The universe, in humanism, the universe is self-existing and not created. Man is a part of nature, and that he has emerged as a result of continuous process. The nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. Whereas Christianity, the universe was created by God and exists by his hand. Man is created in the image of God and therefore has value as he exhibits that image. And because he is the creator, the Lord has a right and authority to establish the concept of what is right and what is wrong, which gives us a basis for human values. It is an important concept. Verse 25 says, Adam slept with his wife again, and she gave birth to another son. She named him Seth, for she said, God has granted me another son in place of Abel, the one Cain killed. This is, if you like, stepping back again. Remember, we're familiar with this. You see a big picture, and then God steps back and gives us the finer details. So, having followed the line of Cain, and actually following down through generations, we're now going back and stepping back into seeing another son being born. But this one is going to be a more religious son, in the sense of a more God-conscious son. Since man had caused the fall and sin's curse, God must enter history as a man to redeem fallen man, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. God has always used men and women to accomplish his plan to save all those who obey him. On the other hand, he allowed Satan to use men and women to try to accomplish his plan to destroy mankind. Cain was not the last person used by Satan to try and eliminate the seed of the woman. God gave Eve another seed to carry on the line of promise. Now our perspective switches back to Adam and Eve. They have given birth to Cain and Abel, and we've traced the careers of both men. It's a tragedy. One son was killed, the other became a murderer. Now we see the birth of another son. This son brings hope of good things to come. The phrase slept with his wife has led some to believe that the only purpose of sexual intercourse is for procreation. I think the phrase simply indicates that sometime after the death of Abel, Eve became pregnant again and had another son. When you think of her being the mother of all the nations, Eve must have had many, many children in her lifetime. Seth, his name means appointed. He is given this name because God had appointed another offspring to replace the murdered Abel. It's through Seth that the Messiah ultimately shall come. There is a sense in which Seth can be seen as a type of Christ. He is appointed by God to take the place of Abel, who has been put to death. In the same way, Christ was appointed to take our place and was even put to death in our place. The narrative is not written in truly historical, chronological order of events. Incidentally, Genesis 5:4 explains how Cain got his wife. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. That's plenty of time to create, procreate, and fill the earth, as we were told to do in the beginning. Enosh, this is a normal word for mortal man. Verse 26. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. It was during his lifetime that people first began to worship the Lord. Now, Enosh is a normal word for mortal man. It's regularly found in Job and Psalms. What is man that you are mindful of him? Psalm 8 verse 4 says. It could be that we are to see this name in contrast with Lamech, who had appointed to his own strength and self-sufficiency. While Lamech boasted of his strength, sense points to his weakness. It's only when we come to terms with our own weaknesses that we will be ready to call upon the name of the Lord. It is now we read that men began to call upon the name of the Lord. This suggests that even in the midst of the growing corruption of the descendants of Cain, there was a remnant who sought to follow the Lord. The idea of calling upon the name of the Lord is a concept that will trace throughout the rest of Genesis. We'll be able to gauge the spiritual temperature of Abraham and his descendants by how we see them call upon the name of the Lord. The name Yahweh was unknown to the patriarchs. I think some interpreters tried to make this verse say these men began to call themselves by the name of Yahweh in order to explain who the sons of God are in Genesis 6. The text doesn't bear out this translation. Yahweh did not reveal his name to anyone until he revealed it to Moses at the burning bush. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24:37. Jesus said, if you want to know what the earth will be like at the time of his return, study the days of Noah in the time before the coming of the flood. The conditions will be of similar nature: eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage. In other words, be business as usual. The coming of Christ for many will be as unexpected as the coming of the flood. Everything we know about the days before the flood are given to us in Genesis 4-6. These 3 chapters form a subset of a larger narrative in which they are found. They give us the condition of the world prior to the flood. Genesis 4, the descendants of Cain, the picture of those following in the way of Cain. Genesis 5, the descendants of Seth, the picture of those descending from Seth. And Genesis 6, the intermarriage of sons of God and daughters of men, a picture of moral weakness. The biblical picture of life prior to flood as seen in these 3 chapters is one of growing apostasy. It's a picture in descendants of Cain of a believing remnant as seen in the persons of Enoch and Noah, and a polluting influence that is pictured in the intermarriage described in the first several chapters of chapter 6. In particular, there's a contrast that is set up between the 2 genealogies of Genesis 4 and 5. These 2 genealogies, presented as they are in parallel, are meant to be seen in contrast with one another. In the line of Cain, we can theorize that Eve named Cain as she says, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Cain then murdered his brother Abel. Cain's son was named Enoch, or dedicated. Lamech in the text was the 7th from Adam through Cain. He killed a young man. In the line of Seth, we're told that Adam called his name Seth. Seth was appointed to take Abel's place. Seth's son was named Enosh, which is mortal. Enoch in the term was 7th from Adam through Seth. He walked with God and did not die. Interesting contrast, isn't it? As we come to Genesis 5, our focus shifts to the line of Cain and the rebellious attitudes to the line of Seth and the godly remnant that was preserved amidst the growing apostasy. Each reference to a patriarch follows a specific pattern: his name, his age at the birth of his first son, the length of his remaining life, along with a statement that he had other sons and daughters, and his age at death. There are only 3 variations from this formula. They take place when we speak of 3 patriarchs: Adam, 5 verse 3, Enoch, 5:22-24, and Lamech, 5:28-29. This part of the Bible history is also world history. As previously mentioned, the Hebrew word for man, meaning human being, is Adam. So the genealogies given in the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the genesis of genealogies of mankind, since all human beings came from the first man whose personal name was also man, or Adam in Hebrew. Adma. The Bible's history gains more credibility as historians learn more about the peoples and the times mentioned therein. The average age of which the first child was born to the patriarchs listed in chapter 5 is 155.6 years. Taking into account God's command to multiply and fill the earth and the much greater longevity of the people of that time, the pre-flood families must have been much larger in comparison to today's families. The childbearing years of mothers would have also been much longer than today. Therefore, the human population of the pre-flood earth could have numbered several millions. The genealogy of Adam, Genesis 5:1-32. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. He blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, named Seth. Then in the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, for 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and then he died. Genesis 5:1-5. Already seen in Genesis 2:4, the introduction of that section described as the generations of the heavens and the earth. This time we're introduced to the book of the generations of Adam. This suggests that these records have long since been reduced to writing and passed from father to son until they came to the hands of Moses. While these might have originally been made up of oral traditions, they are now known as a book. Just as the generations of the heavens and the earth were given in chapters 2 to 4, so now we see the generations of Adam. These will be the histories of Adam that came and what came as a result of his legacy. When we read through the creation narratives of both 1 and 2, we get the sense that creation took place with an appearance of age. Plants were created yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit. In a similar manner, Adam himself seemed to be fully formed as an adult rather than a baby. This would indicate that he was created in such a way as to appear as though he had gone through the natural maturing process. Adam and Eve were apparently in the garden only a short time prior to the temptation and fall. After expulsion from the garden, Eve gives birth to both Cain and Abel and perhaps a number of daughters, one of which will ultimately become Cain's wife. It's only after the murder of Abel and the departure of Cain that we read of Adam and Eve having a son to replace the fallen Abel. Thus, by the time Adam was 130, marking time of his creation, his first two sons had already grown to adulthood. The murder of one had already taken place. Cain had been banished to the land of Nod, where he was engaged in building a city. Adam had been created after the image and likeness of God. We don't read here that his sons were born in the image and likeness of God, although we understand from other passages of Scripture that this relationship continues today. Instead, we're told that they were born in the likeness and image of Adam. Is this significant? What is involved in being a likeness and according to the image of Adam? We noted the context of Genesis 1:26-27 points to, in the following verse, to the aspect of rulership. Man was created to exercise dominion over the animal and plant kingdom. He served as a representative of God to the rest of creation. There is a sense in which this same pattern continues in Adam's descendants. At the same time, we must admit there may be additional aspects to being in the likeness and image of both Adam and in the likeness and image of God. We are in God's likeness and his image. As we are thinking and rational beings, we are self-aware, we have a sense of that which is beyond the physical. We are spiritual beings. We have an immoral aspect to us that shall transcend this immortal aspect to us, which shall transcend this mortal body. James 3:9 speaks of how men in general have been made in the likeness of God. This is seen again in Genesis 9:6, where capital punishment is mandated for murder because human life is in the image of God. Christ came not only to restore us to the previous image, but more specifically to conform us to his own image. Romans 8:29 describes how we have been predestined by God to become conformed to the image of his Son. God had an idea in mind that when those who wanted to be followers of Jesus would want to be like Jesus, and therefore he had an image of what Christians were going to be like when they followed Jesus. God envisions a time when all those who want to be followers of Jesus would also want to be like him. This chapter records some extraordinary long lifespans. We take this report at face value, and it's difficult to take it any other way. Then this would suggest that both Adam and Eve and the descendants were able to have a great many children, leading to an extensive population explosion. What are we going to make of this list of names? It brings up a number of questions and poses a number of problems to the Bible student. Genesis 4:4-5 says, after the birth of Seth, Adam lived 800 years. He had other sons and daughters, and he died at the age of 930. The age of humanity. If we treat this genealogy as strict history by which we are to derive the dates of our ancestors, then we could count backwards from Abraham around 2000 BC to arrive at a date of creation around 4000 BC. It was by the use of such methods that James Ussher, the Archbishop of Armagh, Primate of all Ireland and Vice Chancellor of the Trinity College in Dublin, published his chronology, establishing the first day of creation as Sunday, October 23, 4004 BC. Good for him. Ussher arrived at his date assuming there were no gaps in the genealogies. The problem with such a chronology is that it is contradicted by archaeological finds, not to mention those of geologists and biologists, as well as biblical facts. I'll deal in greater detail as to how this dating problem arose and why we can have confidence in the biblical text later in dealing with the genealogy of Genesis in chapter 11. Bishop Ussher's wrong Bible chronology. Sadly, it's quite common to see charts with and read references to Ussher's wrong Bible chronology. This can and does often undermine people's confidence in the biblical message and those who bring that message. Fortunately, the scriptures themselves bear testament that such genealogies are understood to be stylized, so they contain deliberate omissions. This is seen, for example, in the genealogy of Matthew 1, where a number of kings are omitted. Matthew 1:8, the names of Ahaziah, Athaliah, Jehoash, and Amaziah are left out between the kings of Joram and Uzziah. This deliberate manipulation of the text to achieve 14 names in each of the 3 sections of this chapter is done because the Hebrew language used letters as numerical equivalents, beginning with the Hebrew A, 1, B, 2, G, 3, etc. The name David in Hebrew consists of only 3 letters, D, W, D. Jesus is being shown to be the son of David. The Holy Spirit through Matthew is using a play on words, a stylized genealogy, to bring about a certain conclusion and helps us to see God at work in his Son over time. There is also a stylized genealogy seen as comparing Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. In Adam, 10 generations, Noah, 3 sons. And Noah, 10 generations, Terah, 3 sons. We got 10 generations from Adam to Noah, then we have 3 sons. Then we go 10 generations from Noah to Terah, then we have 3 sons. When we see in parallel, we see 10 generations of both. It may mean that there are 10 generations or perhaps not. But 10 is very important. 10 commandments, 10 plagues. Notice something about the ages of people before the flood and after the flood. This chart is from the book of Genesis flood. Notice the average age from Adam to Noah, it's about 900 years. Notice after Noah we have a drastic lowering of lifespan down into the lower hundreds, rather than 900 years. It's that repetitious requiem. One of the striking things about these series of names is the repeated refrain from which each account closes, and he died. It's a droning drumbeat of death. It's a reminder that the effects of sin and the consequent loss of access to the tree of life continue to be felt throughout history. A great fall had taken place and death is now seen to be reigning through these genealogies. And he died. 8 times these ominous words appear in this chapter, emphasizing the reign of death of Adam's fallen race. What a brutal liar of Satan proved to be. The big thing in the chapter, however, is the revelation that in spite of the universal reign of death, the sons of God, that is, the people who responded to God's love and honoured him, were continued in the posterity of Seth. Apparently Eve was the first to recognise the special significance of this patriarch, through whom the chosen people would descend, and through whom, at last, the Messiah would be born. It's quite obvious that Canaanite descendants of Adam were sons following the evil of the devil, and that the Sethites were to be the sons of God. He had other. Regarding all 10 in the list except Noah indicates the stripped down nature of the genealogies. The naming of any individual was for a special purpose of establishing the line of Noah back to Adam. Most of the sons and all of the daughters are omitted. Note also the total number of children born in any list is not even mentioned. How many children did each have? The number could have been truly fantastic. No doubt there were many children born to each of these patriarchs prior to the particular son who was designated. Only those who are designed to appear in the messianic lines were singled out for identification. a listing of the godly line. You might be the only one in your family who believes. You can be the beginning of such a godly line in your family today. Determine today that every generation coming from you will be a part of a godly line. Make this your life's priority. This genealogy lists only the godly line of Seth. We do not read here of any that followed in the way of Cain or Lamech. These are the men who stood for God in the midst of a generation that was so bad that God would rather remove them from the earth than allow them to remain. It's a listing of faithful men. The people in this line were a minority. No surprise there. They stood up against the people of the day and they held their faith. They are reminded that you need not be discouraged when you are alone. God is on your side. The marvelous thing that these men are listed by name, God has the names of his faithful recorded in a book. And those who feared the Lord spoke to one another, and the Lord gave attention and heard it, and the book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear the Lord and who esteem his name. And they will be mine, says the Lord of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him, Malachi says. But this chapter in particular is particularly concerned with the tracing of the line of the sons of God. This is evident in the very names that were being given. Seth means appointed or seedling. Enosh means inquire of the Lord. Mahalalel means praise of the Lord, of God. Jared means descent. Enoch means dedicated. Noah means rest. Have you ever met a VIP who called you by your name? It would be a man who meets hundreds and thousands of people each day, but who knows you by name. The God that we worship is greater than a VIP, and yet he knows your name, and he tells you to call him Father. Genesis 5:6-8. When Seth was 105 years old, his son Enosh was born. After the birth of Enosh, Seth lived another 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 912. 6 and 7. When Enosh was born 90 years old, his son Cain was born. After the birth of Cain, Enosh lived another 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 905. Genesis 12-14. When Cain was 70 years old, his son Mahalalel was born. After the birth of Mahalalel, Cain lived another 840 years. He had other sons and daughters, and he died at the age of 910. 15 and 17. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, his son Jared was born, and after the birth of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years, and had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 895. 18-20. When Jared was 162 years old, his son Enoch was born. After the birth of Enoch, Jared lived another 800 years. He had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 962. Let's talk about Enoch, the man who walked with God. Just as Genesis 4 spotlights the rebellious nature of the seventh from Adam through the line of Cain and the person of Lamech, so now Genesis 5 spotlights the seventh from Adam through the line of Seth by focusing on the person of Enoch. Lamech, seventh from Adam through Cain, he killed a man and wrote a boastful song of his deed. Enoch, seventh from Adam through Seth, he walked with God and did not die. These two men stand in contrast to one another. Excuse me. They are an example of the two lines of mankind that were living upon the earth in the days before the flood. Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God. He was not, for God took him. The man who walks with God always reaches his destination. Enoch was a jewel among those with genealogy. Enoch, the man who did not die. Enoch was taken during the strongest years of his life compared to other men who lived when he did. Enoch was in reality quite young. His father Jared lived 962 years. His son Methuselah lived 969 years. Enoch only lived 365 years. It is said that every day Enoch and God walked and talked together, each day getting further from Enoch's house. Then one day they walked so far, God said, "Well, you might as well come home with me." We can learn many things from Enoch. One of these many things would include the fact that before God takes us with him, we have to have a good reputation. It doesn't matter where we live or who we live with. We can walk with God the way Enoch did only if we want to. Galatians 5:16 says, "So I advise you, live according to your new life in the Holy Spirit. Then you won't be doing what your sinful nature craves." All who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified themselves with all his passions and desires. We live in the Spirit. Let us also walk in the Spirit. Ephesians 4, "I beg you, I, a prisoner here in jail for serving the Lord, to live and act in a way worthy of those who have been chosen for such wonderful blessings as these." Enoch gave testimony that he loved God and walked with him. To walk means, in the context, walking, doing, to practice. We all want to be taken by God, but before we want that to happen, we have to have a good testimony. But how do we obtain a good testimony? Hebrews 11:5 says, "Pleasing God." By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony. He had this testimony that he pleased God. John says, "If you love me, you will obey my commandments." Revelation 22:12, "Look, I'm coming soon. My reward is with me to repay everyone as their deeds deserve." I don't think Enoch would have complained about the length of his earthly life in view of where he had been taken by God. What happened to Enoch was like a resurrection. Enoch didn't die, but his physical body must have been changed into the same kind of spiritual bodies those who are living on earth when Jesus returns will get. He will take these weak mortal bodies of ours and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using the same mighty power that he will use to conquer everything everywhere. I say that because his body was left upon earth. Why did God take Enoch? Was that man so good at such an early age God took him so he wouldn't have to see death? What did God say about his son Enoch? It wasn't worth having a diamond like Enoch here on earth, perhaps. We can agree on the fact that this is the type of man that we need here on earth, so other men can realize that they're living in sin. Jonah, 2 Peter, Genesis, Ruth, Malachi. Did God expect to be taken up, and did Enoch expect to be taken into heaven at any moment? Probably not. But he did always live as if he would be taken up at any time. That's a good lesson for us. Hebrews 9:27 says, "It's appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment." This is a general principle and has some notable exceptions. Up until this time, no one had been taken up into heaven. So Enoch didn't know about this experience, but the moment did come. Instead of reading, "and he died," we read, "he was not." He was not. We understand this to mean that Enoch didn't die. He was taken in a manner that didn't involve death. It's not a unique circumstance, for the New Testament teaches we should not all sleep. Those who are alive when the Lord returns shall not die. Instead, they shall be changed, and we shall be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. The Enoch narrative reminds us of two things. First, it reminds us that death is an enemy. There are some people who maintain that death is merely a natural part of existence, nothing more than the end of life that is to be embraced and cherished. This is not true. Death is unnatural. We look at death, and sometimes within tells us that it's not the way it's supposed to be. Death is an enemy. The Enoch narrative also reminds us that death is an enemy that shall ultimately be destroyed. There is one who has overcome death, and there is one coming a day when the experience of Enoch will be shared by all who are alive and remain at the Lord's coming. As Christians, we know that moment will come as the Bible has declared it. Christ is coming. Are we walking in the way that he wants us to? Did Enoch know this? Of course he did. We know how we are doing spiritually better than anyone else can know us. So this is the way in which all of us who are mature should be thinking. And if we are still thinking differently in any way, then we need to wake up to reality. Nevertheless, to the degree that we already attained, let us walk by the same rule. Let us be of the same mind. Enoch knew he was not of this earth. That's why he lived as if at any moment he would be taken away. Paul talks to us, the Christians. We are citizens of heaven, where the Lord Jesus lives. We are eagerly waiting for him to return as our Saviour. He will take these weak mortal bodies of ours and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using the same mighty power that he will use to conquer everything everywhere. Colossians 3 tells us, look for what Enoch was looking for. Since you have been raised in new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits at God's right hand, in the place of honour and power. Let heaven fill your thoughts. Do not think only about the things here upon earth. For when Christ died, your real life is hidden with Christ in God. The grace of God has been revealed, bringing salvation to all people, and we are instructed to turn from godless living and sinful pleasures. We should live in this world with self-control, right conduct, devotion to God, while we look forward to that wonderful event when the glory of our great God and Saviour Jesus Christ will be revealed. He gave his life to free us from every kind of sin, to cleanse us, to make us his very own people, totally committed to doing what is right. You must teach these things and encourage your people to do them, correcting them when necessary. You have the authority to do this. So don't let anyone ignore you or disregard what you say. The last reference about Enoch is found in Jude. Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which are committed in an ungodly way, and all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. This isolated reference to Enoch seems to be derived from the apocryphal book of Enoch. This doesn't mean we must take everything in the book of Enoch to be authoritative, for the New Testament even quotes pagan philosophers on occasion, and even a stop clock can be right twice a day. This passage contains a prophecy of the second coming of Christ. Enoch was evidently given this prophecy in his day, and he preached it to the people of his generation. Already at this early date in history, mankind was being warned of God's coming judgment. When Methuselah was 187 years old, his son Lamech was born. After the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years. He had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 969. Scholars have wrestled with the meaning of the name Methuselah. Several suggestions have been presented. Man of the weapon, from he shall be sending forth of death. Methuselah was the longest living man in history. 969 years is just 31 years short of 1,000. 2,000 years have passed since Jesus' birth. Methuselah lived almost half as long as that time period. Some people are annoyed at the Bible's claim for some of the ages of these men. What is really remarkable about the ages of the patriarchs given here is that it's so dramatically different from the fantastic ages accredited to ancient men in various mythologies dealing with the same time period. For example, the ages of often great heroes up to and including the flood, according to Babylonian myth, vary between 18,000 years and over 64,000 years each. That's giving some a total of 432,000 years for consecutive reigns of these 10 kings. There are certainly a lot fewer problems with the Genesis account. Genesis 5:28-30. When Lamech was 182 years old, his son Noah was born. Lamech named his son Noah, for he said, "He will bring us relief from the painful labour of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed." After the birth of Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 777. We've already seen that Enoch was a prophet. Now we learn Enoch's grandson Lamech also was a prophet. His prophecy regards his own son Noah. And Noah means rest. He was given this name because this one shall give us rest from our work, from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed. To what sort of rest does this refer? It was a promise to the restlessness of the soul that had been seen in Cain, and which was passed down to Lamech, and which is now making itself known to the entire generation. Noah means rest or comfort. He is a type of him in whom we have rest and comfort. I think the comfort Noah brought to the world was to get rid of all the rampant evil in that old world and give the world a new beginning. Think of the violent horrors men must have wreaked upon each other to give God one to drown all of them and start over again with Noah and his family. This brings us to the end of the 10 stylized generations from Adam to Noah's second son Shem. The behavior of human beings, especially those who did not worship the true God, must have changed drastically for the worst since the creation. A lot of things have happened in the world since the creation. Sin has entered the world and corrupted man and the universe. The first children have been born. The first murder has been committed. Cain and his wife have children. Cain builds a city. One of Cain's descendants probably became the first polygamist. The first occupations or crafts beside farming and herding cattle and sheep are begun by the descendants of Cain. Adam and Eve have a son to replace Abel in the seed line from Eve to the Messiah. The genealogy of Cain is given and he and his line are lost from history. Seth's descendants revive the worship of God. Seth's genealogy will be continued beyond the great flood of Noah, who was a descendant of Seth. In just 5 short chapters, we have covered many years of world history. Many other things were done in this period. They were not even recorded because they have nothing to do with God's scheme or plan to redeem man. The spade of the archaeologist has uncovered some of the record and the artifacts of the period. They're finding more every year, but the dating of many of them may always be controversial. The patriarchal age before the flood in summary, Genesis 1 to 5. We find in Genesis chapter 1 creation, Genesis 2 Adam and Eve, Genesis 3 the first sin, Genesis 4 Cain and Abel, Genesis 5 generations from Adam to Noah. If you've got something of value out of this lesson, please feel free to come back and be with us again as we begin to look at the story of Noah.